The text came in while I was standing beside my wedding cake, my husband's hand still resting gently against the small of my back. "What did you do?" 3 seconds later, another message arrived. "Claire is hysterical." Then another. "The country club is threatening to shut the event down." I stared at the screen while soft jazz floated through the ballroom behind me. My guests were laughing quietly. Someone clinked a champagne glass. Across the room, one of my old Air Force colleagues was helping my 72-year-old neighbor cut into a tray of cannoli. And suddenly, for the first time in my entire life, I realized something terrifying. My father had never once expected me to stop saving them. Not when he forgot my birthdays during deployment, not when he skipped my promotion ceremony, not even when my own family abandoned my wedding to attend my sister's engagement party instead. Because in their minds, I would always come back, always forgive, always pay. I looked down at the glowing screen one more time while my father's next message appeared. "Please answer me." I smiled slowly. Then I typed 6 words that made my father go completely silent. "You chose her, live with it." The truth was, my revenge had started months before any of them even realized there was a war. My name is Evelyn Carter, and this is the story of how my family missed my wedding and lost everything the very same night. When people picture military officers, they usually imagine someone loud, commanding, impossible to ignore. My father certainly did. Growing up in rural Georgia, he used to tell people his daughters would either become beauty queens or disappointments. Claire became the beauty queen by age 16. I became the disappointment around the same time I learned how to field strip an M4 rifle faster than most boys in ROTC. Claire had blonde hair that bounced when she laughed, and a way of making every room revolve around her. Men bought her drinks before she was old enough to legally order them. Teachers forgave late assignments because she smiled apologetically and touched their arm. Even when she wrecked Dad's truck at 19, somehow he ended up apologizing to her. I was different, taller, quieter, more controlled. Dad used to say I walked like I was marching into battle even when I was carrying groceries into the house. By 23, I was commissioned into the United States Air Force. By 34, I was a major overseeing logistics operations that involved more money in a month than my father had earned in his entire lifetime. But none of that mattered back home. To Dad, Claire was still his pride. I was simply useful. I learned that distinction early. When Mom needed surgery and insurance wouldn't cover the specialist in Atlanta, I wired $12,000 without hesitation. Dad told relatives Claire had helped coordinate everything. Claire posted inspirational quotes online while I sat beside Mom's hospital bed for 4 nights straight, sleeping upright in an uncomfortable vinyl chair. When Dad's construction business nearly collapsed after 2 bad investments, I quietly refinanced part of the debt through connections I had built over years of disciplined financial planning. He told people the market recovered. And every Christmas, every birthday, every family reunion, Claire somehow remained the center of attention, while I remained the emergency contact. Still, some stubborn part of me kept hoping things would change. Maybe that's what daughters do. Maybe we keep trying long after common sense tells us to stop. I met Daniel 2 years before the wedding at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. He was a flight surgeon with tired green eyes and the calmest voice I'd ever heard. Unlike most people, he never tried to compete with me, never mocked my schedule, never called me intimidating. On our 3rd date, I apologized for checking work emails during dinner. He smiled and said, "You don't have to shrink around me, Evelyn." I almost cried right there in the restaurant. Daniel understood silence. He understood duty. He understood the strange loneliness that comes with spending years learning how to survive impossible situations while pretending they don't affect you. When he proposed to me on a quiet beach in North Carolina during leave, there were no photographers, no audience, just wind off the ocean and his hands trembling slightly as he held the ring. For the first time in years, I let myself believe I could build something gentle. We mailed the wedding invitations 4 months in advance because military schedules are complicated. I chose cream-colored stationery with navy lettering. Elegant, but understated. Very Daniel, very me. Mom cried when she received hers. Claire texted back 3 days later. So formal, LOL. Dad called me exactly once during the planning process. "You sure you want to do it Memorial Day weekend?" he asked. "People travel." We checked with everyone important, I replied carefully. He grunted. Seems expensive for one day. That was it. No questions about flowers, no excitement, no offer to walk me down the aisle. Just mild irritation like I'd informed him about road construction near his favorite fishing spot. Daniel noticed my expression after the call ended. He doesn't deserve you, he said quietly. I hated how badly I wanted that not to be true. 2 weeks later, Dad hosted a family barbecue at his house. The Georgia heat was brutal that afternoon, thick enough to make the air feel sticky in my lungs. Country music played from old speakers near the deck while Dad worked the grill like he was auditioning for a beer commercial. Claire arrived 40 minutes late wearing white linen pants and oversized sunglasses. Her new boyfriend Tyler followed behind her carrying a bottle of expensive champagne like a prop. Tyler came from money, real money. His family owned several car dealerships across Alabama. Dad practically glowed whenever Tyler spoke to him. Halfway through dinner, Claire tapped her wine glass dramatically. We have news, she announced. Dad immediately grinned. Tyler stood, loosened his collar, and wrapped an arm around Claire's waist. We're engaged. Everyone erupted. Mom gasped. My Aunt Linda actually started crying. Dad slapped Tyler on the back so hard I thought the man might choke on his beer. Claire lifted her left hand, showing off a diamond large enough to redirect aircraft. Then came the second bomb. We booked the engagement party already, she said excitedly. Memorial Day weekend at the Savannah Crest Country Club. My stomach tightened. That was my wedding weekend. I looked at Claire carefully, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the correction. Instead, she smiled directly at me. The venue only had that Saturday available, she said with a tiny shrug. Silence spread slowly around the table. Dad cleared his throat first. Well, he laughed awkwardly. Looks like we've got a busy weekend. Nobody defended me. Nobody even looked surprised. And in that moment, sitting beneath cheap patio lights while my father poured champagne for my sister's engagement, I finally understood something that should have been obvious years ago. They hadn't forgotten my wedding. They had simply decided it mattered less. I didn't say anything for almost 10 seconds after Claire announced the engagement party date. The entire table felt suspended in syrupy southern heat. The smell of charcoal and smoked ribs lingered in the air while cicadas screamed from the trees behind Dad's backyard fence. Everyone suddenly became very interested in their drinks. Claire, meanwhile, looked perfectly relaxed. She took a slow sip of champagne and crossed one tan leg over the other beneath the patio table, like this was all completely normal. I stared at her. You booked it on my wedding day. Her eyebrows lifted slightly behind oversized sunglasses. Oh my God, Evelyn, not everything is an attack. Dad sighed immediately, already irritated with me instead of her. Claire said the venue was limited. Our invitations already went out, I replied carefully. Tyler jumped in with an uncomfortable laugh. Honestly, we didn't even think. That's the problem, I said. Silence. Claire slowly lowered her glass onto the table. There are 2 events, she said. People can choose. Choose. The word hit harder than it should have. Because deep down I already knew exactly what would happen. Dad leaned back in his chair and wiped barbecue sauce from his fingers. Honey, your sister's older. She's been waiting a long time for this. I almost laughed out loud. Claire was 38 years old and had broken off 2 previous engagements because one man wasn't ambitious enough and the other looked tired in photographs. Meanwhile, Daniel and I had spent years building a relationship across deployments, emergency calls, and 12-hour time differences. But somehow Claire was still the fragile one. Still the priority. Mom finally spoke softly. Maybe one event could shift by a day. Claire's face tightened instantly. The country club is booked solid. Dad nodded. And your wedding venue probably is too. It is, I said. Then there you go. I looked around the table slowly. Nobody was on my side. Not really. Not openly. A familiar exhaustion settled into my chest, the kind I used to feel returning from deployments after 72 hours awake. That same emotional numbness. The same realization that survival required shutting certain feelings off. Claire reached over and squeezed Tyler's arm dramatically. We're just trying to celebrate our happiness, too. I finally looked directly at her. You knew exactly what date you picked. Her smile thinned. Then came the line that changed something permanently inside me. "Well," she said lightly, "your wedding is pretty small anyway." Dad chuckled under his breath like that was somehow reasonable. Daniel set his beer down very carefully beside his plate. I knew that expression on his face. Controlled anger, dangerous calm. Actually, he said evenly, "Our wedding is exactly the size we wanted." Claire rolled her eyes slightly. I didn't mean anything by it. Dad pointed his fork toward me. "Evelyn, don't start drama over this." Drama. That word again? It was always drama when I reacted to being hurt, never when Claire caused the damage. I stood slowly from the table. "No," I said quietly. "I'm just done rearranging my life to make hers easier." The entire backyard went silent except for the buzzing insects. Dad's expression hardened immediately. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not changing my wedding date." Claire threw up both hands. "Nobody asked you to." Dad looked directly at me. "Your sister's engagement is important. And my wedding isn't—" That's not what I said. But it was exactly what he meant. The drive home that night felt painfully quiet. Georgia pine trees blurred past the windows while humid rain clouds gathered overhead. Daniel kept one hand loosely on the steering wheel. "You okay?" I stared out the passenger window for several seconds before answering. "I think tonight finally killed something." He glanced at me briefly but didn't interrupt. "My whole life," I said softly. "I kept thinking if I worked hard enough, if I became successful enough, disciplined enough, eventually my father would look at me the way he looks at Claire." Daniel reached over and took my hand. "But he doesn't even see you," he said quietly. That hurt because it was true. Over the next several weeks, the family group chat transformed into a non-stop engagement party planning committee. Claire spammed photos of floral arrangements, champagne towers, gold-trimmed menus, and dress fittings nearly every day. Nobody mentioned my wedding anymore. Not once. Mom occasionally sent me private messages apologizing for the tension, but even she sounded exhausted by trying to keep peace between impossible people. Then the phone calls from relatives started. First Aunt Linda. "Honey," she said gently, "your father's under a lot of pressure financially right now. Claire's engagement means a lot to him." I nearly laughed. Financial pressure. If only she knew. Then Cousin Rebecca called. "Couldn't you postpone a few weeks?" she asked. "Your sister already paid deposits." So had I. Thousands of dollars worth. Non-refundable. But somehow that never mattered when the sacrifice was expected from me. A few days later, Dad called while I was reviewing logistics reports at Peterson Space Force Base. I answered because some childish part of me still hoped. "Listen," he said without greeting, "people are feeling forced to choose." I closed the office door quietly. "They are choosing. That's unfair." "No," I replied calmly. "What's unfair is pretending this happened accidentally." Dad exhaled sharply into the phone. "Your sister's finally happy." "So am I." Silence. Then came the sentence I would replay in my head for months afterward. "She needs the support more than you do." I leaned back slowly in my chair. There it was. The truth. Claire was loved because she needed things. I was neglected because I survived without them. Strong daughters became invisible eventually. I ended the call politely, but after that, something inside me became frighteningly calm. Not angry. Not emotional. Strategic. The wedding week arrived, wrapped in heavy spring humidity and dark, rolling clouds over Savannah. Daniel's parents flew in from Colorado 2 days early and treated me with more warmth in 48 hours than my own father had shown in years. His mother helped steam my dress while humming softly under her breath. His father fixed loose decorations without being asked. Nobody complained. Nobody competed. It felt foreign. Almost suspicious. The night before the wedding, Mom called crying quietly from her bathroom so Dad wouldn't hear. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I sat alone on the hotel balcony overlooking the riverfront. "Are you coming tomorrow?" Long silence. Then I heard her inhale shakily. "Your father thinks splitting attendance would embarrass Claire." The words landed softly, almost gently. But somehow that made them worse. I closed my eyes. "I understand." "Evelyn." "It's okay, Mom." But it wasn't. And we both knew it. The next morning I stood in the bridal suite wearing my military-issued posture like armor, while outside guests slowly filled the chapel seats. Or at least some seats. Not many. Rows remained painfully empty on my side of the aisle. No father, no sister, no cousins. Almost nobody from the family I had spent years protecting. Just silence and empty chairs. One of my Air Force colleagues squeezed my shoulder gently before the ceremony began. "The people who matter showed up," she whispered. I nodded politely. But as the music started and the chapel doors slowly opened, one devastating realization settled fully into my chest. My family hadn't missed my wedding because they couldn't come. They missed it because they chose not to. The chapel was beautiful in the quietest way possible. Soft candlelight flickered against cream-colored walls, while white roses lined the aisle in low arrangements Daniel had insisted on paying extra for because he knew I loved simplicity done well. Outside, Savannah rain tapped gently against stained glass windows, turning the afternoon light silver blue. And still all I could see were the empty seats. There's a particular kind of humiliation that comes from looking at places where people should have been. The first row on my side remained almost entirely untouched, except for my mother's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, who sat clutching tissues in trembling hands. Behind her sat 3 Air Force officers in dress uniforms, and one retired colonel who had once mentored me during deployment in Qatar. That was it. Meanwhile, Daniel's side overflowed with people. Friends, relatives, former colleagues, laughter, warmth. His family looked at me with genuine affection, which somehow made the absence of my own hurt even worse. The organ music began softly. I stood at the back entrance, gripping my bouquet while my wedding coordinator whispered, "Ready." "Number?" But I nodded anyway. Because military training teaches you something useful very early, sometimes your body moves forward long after your heart stops cooperating. The chapel doors opened. Every guest stood. And for one split second the ache inside my chest almost disappeared when I saw Daniel waiting at the altar. He looked overwhelmed already. His eyes immediately filled the moment he saw me. Not because my dress was expensive, not because the ceremony was impressive, but because it was me. That realization nearly unraveled me right there in the doorway. I walked alone down the aisle with my spine straight and my chin lifted exactly the way my father used to mock when I was younger. "Walk like a normal girl, Evelyn," he'd say. "You stomp around like you're invading a country." Now that same posture was the only thing holding me together. As I passed the empty front row, I kept my eyes fixed ahead. Do not look, do not break, just keep moving. Daniel reached for my hands the second I arrived beside him. "You're here," he whispered. Such a simple sentence. Yet somehow it felt like rescue. The ceremony itself passed in fragments I still remember vividly years later. The warmth of Daniel's fingers, the faint scent of rain drifting through old wood doors, the sound of Mrs. Hargrove openly sobbing during our vows, the tiny tremor in Daniel's voice when he promised, "You will never have to earn love with me." That line nearly destroyed me. Because I had spent my entire life doing exactly that. Earning, proving, performing, providing, and somehow still ending up emotionally unpaid. After the ceremony, guests gathered in a restored riverfront ballroom several blocks away. The reception wasn't extravagant, but it was elegant. Candlelit tables, navy linen runners, a jazz trio playing near the windows overlooking the Savannah River. Daniel kept trying to make me laugh during photographs because he could tell I was drifting emotionally somewhere dark. "You know," he murmured while the photographer adjusted lighting, "your father's missing excellent bourbon right now." I smiled faintly. "There it is," the photographer said immediately. "That smile, hold that." For a while I almost managed to forget. Almost. Then my phone buzzed. "Mom." I stared at the screen before answering. The reception noise softened around me as I stepped into a quieter hallway near the ballroom entrance. She sounded breathless. "Evelyn, honey?" In the background I could hear music, loud music. Claire's engagement party. "I just wanted to say congratulations," Mom whispered quickly as though she were afraid someone might overhear. "Thank you." Long silence. Then she broke. "I should have been there." The words came out cracked and wet with guilt. I leaned against the hallway wall and closed my eyes. "You made your choice." "No," she whispered immediately. "Your father made it for everyone." That sounded painfully believable. I heard voices behind her. Claire laughing loudly, Dad speaking to someone, glasses clinking. Mom lowered her voice further. Your father said it would look disrespectful if family members kept leaving Claire's event for yours. Of course he did. Public image, appearances, protecting Claire's feelings. Always Claire's feelings. Something cold settled deeper inside me then. Not rage. Rage burns hot and fast. This felt different. Permanent. I have to go, Mom whispered suddenly. Your father's looking for me. Before hanging up, she said one final thing. I hope someday you understand I loved you both. The line disconnected. I stood there staring at my reflection in the dark ballroom window for several seconds. Then I quietly turned my phone off. When I returned to the reception, Daniel immediately noticed my expression. What happened? Nothing important, I lied. He studied me carefully. Daniel had spent years treating trauma patients. He recognized emotional bleeding even when nobody else did. Without another word, he took my hand and pulled me toward the dance floor just as the jazz trio transitioned into an old Frank Sinatra song. We danced slowly beneath warm amber lights while conversations blurred around us. You know what I think, he said softly. What? I think your family has spent so many years treating you like the strong one that they forgot strength still belongs to a person. I swallowed hard. My father thinks I don't need anyone. That's because he's confused dependence with love. I looked up at him. And what if he never changes? Daniel's hand tightened gently against my waist. Then he loses you. Simple. Clean. True. Hours later, the reception finally relaxed into something warm and intimate. My commanding officer gave an unexpectedly heartfelt toast that made half the room emotional. To Major Evelyn Carter, he said, raising his glass. One of the most dependable leaders I've ever worked with, and one of the most stubborn women alive. Laughter filled the ballroom. She takes care of everyone around her, he continued, so tonight it's nice seeing someone finally take care of her. People applauded softly. And suddenly I had to look away before I cried. Because strangers had spent years appreciating sacrifices my own father never even noticed. Later that evening, Daniel and I stood together beside our wedding cake, while guests gathered around holding champagne glasses. The cake was simple, 3 tiers, white buttercream, fresh flowers. Exactly what we wanted. Someone shouted for us to kiss before cutting it. Daniel laughed and leaned toward me. Then my phone vibrated. Once, twice, 3 times. I frowned slightly. Daniel glanced down. Everything okay? I don't know. I pulled the phone from my clutch and looked at the screen. Dad? What did you do? Another message appeared instantly. Claire is screaming. Then another. The country club manager says payments were canceled. Around us, guests kept smiling unaware. But something deep inside me became very still. Because finally, my family was about to learn exactly who had been holding their entire world together all these years. For several seconds, I simply stared at the messages while the ballroom noise faded into a dull blur around me. What is it? Daniel asked quietly. I looked up at him slowly. Then I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because after 34 years of swallowing disappointment, humiliation, and emotional neglect, the moment I had spent months preparing for had finally arrived. I think I said calmly, my family just discovered the truth. Daniel studied my face carefully. He knew me well enough by then to recognize the difference between anger and resolution. And this was resolution. Another call came through from Dad. Declined. Then Claire. Declined. Then Tyler. That one almost made me laugh. Guests nearby were still chatting warmly, unaware that less than 5 miles away, my sister's glamorous engagement party was collapsing in real time. Daniel leaned slightly closer. You want to tell me what's happening? I slipped the phone back into my clutch. In a minute, I said. First, let's cut the cake. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. But then he smiled slowly, understanding exactly what kind of woman he had married. We cut the cake while applause filled the ballroom. Cameras flashed. Someone popped another champagne bottle near the dance floor. And all the while, my phone continued vibrating non-stop against my wrist like a heartbeat. When the applause settled, Daniel quietly guided me toward the private bridal suite connected to the ballroom. The second the door closed behind us, I finally exhaled fully. Then I handed him the phone. He read the messages silently. What payments, he asked. I sat slowly on the velvet sofa near the window. All of them. His eyes lifted immediately. Now it was time. For years, my father believed he had survived a series of financial disasters through luck, timing, and family resilience. That's what he told people anyway. The truth was much uglier. Dad's construction company had begun failing nearly 6 years earlier after 2 terrible investments and a tax issue he hid from everyone except Mom. By then, Claire was already drowning in credit card debt from a lifestyle she couldn't afford, but refused to scale back from. And because I was the reliable daughter, the calm daughter, the military daughter, I stepped in quietly. At first it was temporary. A mortgage payment here, a debt consolidation loan there, tuition assistance for Claire's son after her divorce. Dad promised repeatedly he'd recover financially soon. He never did. Instead, dependence became habit. And habit became entitlement. I never told them how much I covered because I didn't want gratitude. I wanted peace, stability, family. But over time, I started noticing something disturbing. The more I sacrificed, the less they respected me. Dad praised Claire endlessly for showing up to Sunday dinners while I was wiring thousands of dollars from overseas deployment zones without even receiving a thank you text. Claire once posted online, "Family always supports each other." That same week, I paid her overdue car note to prevent repossession. Nobody ever asked how I managed it financially. Because nobody really wanted to know. People are comfortable with sacrifice as long as it remains invisible. Daniel sat down across from me slowly. And tonight? I folded my hands together calmly. Tonight, every automatic payment stopped. He stared at me for a second. Then realization hit. The country club? I nodded. 3 months earlier, after Claire announced her engagement party, Dad quietly called me asking for temporary help covering deposits until Tyler's family reimbursed them later. I agreed. Not because I wanted to help Claire. Because by then I had already started planning my exit. Every payment, every loan protection, every emergency transfer, every hidden account stabilizing my father's collapsing finances. All documented carefully. And all tied to one scheduled email. The email had been set to release automatically at precisely 8:45 p.m. tonight. The exact moment Daniel and I cut our wedding cake. Recipients included Dad, Claire, Tyler, their attorney, the Savannah Crest Country Club financial office. And attached to that email was something my father never expected to see. Proof. Years of proof. Bank statements, wire transfers, mortgage records, tax settlements, business loan guarantees, credit card rescues, educational trust disbursements. Every single thing I had quietly paid for while my family treated me like an emotional inconvenience. Daniel leaned back slowly, stunned. You covered all of that yourself. I laughed softly without humor. Mostly during deployments. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then my phone rang again. Dad. This time I answered. The second the line connected, I heard shouting in the background. Claire was screaming. Dad sounded breathless. What the hell did you do? His voice shook in a way I had never heard before. I remained calm. I'm at my wedding reception, Dad. The country club says the payment account was frozen. Cancelled, I corrected gently. Silence. Then what account? That question nearly broke my heart. Because even now, even after all these years, he still didn't know where the money came from. You really thought your business survived on its own? I asked quietly. More silence. Longer this time. Then I heard Tyler's voice in the background. Wait, what does she mean? Claire immediately snapped, she's being dramatic. I closed my eyes briefly. Same Claire, always. Dad's voice lowered. The email. Evelyn, what is all this? There it was. The moment. The exact second my father realized the daughter he ignored had been carrying the entire family on her back for years. I paid your tax lien in 2021, I said evenly. I covered the second mortgage after your refinancing failed. I paid Claire's tuition debt. I funded Jacob's private school account after her divorce. And I personally guaranteed Tyler's business expansion loan 3 months ago. Dead silence. Then Tyler again. You guaranteed what? Oops. Claire clearly hadn't told him that part. I heard muffled arguing explode between them instantly. Dad sounded suddenly smaller somehow. You were paying for everything. I stared out the rain-covered ballroom window at Savannah lights reflecting across dark water. Then I finally said the sentence I had waited years to say. You chose your favorite daughter tonight, Dad, so I stopped paying to be treated like your least favorite one. Behind him, chaos erupted completely. Claire yelling, Tyler demanding answers, voices overlapping, someone crying. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt absolutely nothing. The voicemail messages started arriving before sunrise. I woke slowly to soft gray light spilling through sheer curtains in our honeymoon suite overlooking the Gulf Coast. The waves outside rolled gently against white sand, while somewhere below seagulls cried over the water. For a few peaceful seconds I forgot everything. Then I saw my phone. 14 missed calls from Dad, 7 from Mom, 3 from Claire, 2 unknown numbers I assumed belonged to Tyler or his attorney. Daniel stirred beside me, still half asleep. You don't have to answer those, he murmured. I stared at the screen quietly. I know. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood what freedom felt like. Not revenge, not victory. Freedom. The previous night had detonated exactly the way I knew it would. After I hung up on Dad, the Savannah Crest Country Club immediately demanded full payment for Claire's engagement event once the guaranteed account tied to my financial authorization disappeared. Tyler, already humiliated in front of his wealthy relatives, learned the business loan he'd proudly been discussing for weeks only existed because I had personally guaranteed it through my investment portfolio. Claire apparently tried blaming a bank misunderstanding. That excuse lasted approximately 12 minutes. By midnight, Tyler had left the party. By 1 a.m, half the guests had gone home. And by sunrise, my father's carefully constructed illusion of control had completely collapsed. I listened to the first voicemail while Daniel showered. Evelyn? Dad's voice sounded exhausted. Older, somehow. Please call me back. We need to talk. Need. Not want. Not miss. Need. The second voicemail was from Mom crying softly. Your father didn't know. Honey, I swear he didn't know how much you were doing. That one almost made me laugh. Because ignorance becomes very convenient when someone else is carrying your weight. I deleted both messages. Over the next 3 days, pieces of the fallout reached me through relatives and social media. Tyler moved out of Claire's condo almost immediately after discovering her financial situation was largely fictional. Apparently, she'd spent months implying the Carter family possessed substantial wealth and long-term trust funds. Technically, they did. I was the trust fund. Dad's business creditors began calling after overdue obligations resurfaced without my emergency payments quietly buffering them anymore. The second mortgage notice arrived 2 days later. And for the first time in decades, my father had no hidden safety net. No invisible daughter fixing things behind the curtain. Daniel and I spent those days walking beaches, eating seafood at tiny waterfront restaurants, and rediscovering what calm felt like. Sometimes he'd catch me staring into space during dinner. You okay? He'd ask gently. And strangely enough, I usually was. The grief surprised me less than the relief. I had expected guilt, regret, second thoughts. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Tired in the deep spiritual way people become tired after carrying responsibilities they were never meant to hold alone. On the 4th night of our honeymoon, Mom called again. This time I answered. She sounded fragile. Your father's not doing well. I leaned against the hotel balcony railing while warm ocean wind lifted my hair. What does that mean? He hasn't slept. He keeps going through old records. Of course he was. Probably trying to understand how many years his youngest daughter had quietly protected him while he praised someone else. Mom's voice cracked. He said he thought you were just stronger. That sentence settled heavily into my chest. Because there it was again, the excuse people always use to neglect dependable women. You're stronger, you can handle it, you don't need as much. As though resilience somehow eliminates emotional hunger. I have to go, Mom. Evelyn, wait. I closed my eyes. What? He's ashamed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said the truth neither parent had ever fully understood. He should be. 3 months later, Dad's house went on the market. The same backyard where Claire announced her engagement under glowing patio lights now displayed a for sale sign near the mailbox. Dad's business downsized drastically after losing several contracts. Tyler officially ended things with Claire, who immediately began telling people he was intimidated by strong women, which would have been funny if she'd ever actually supported one. Family members started contacting me carefully after the truth spread. Aunt Linda called first. I had no idea, she admitted quietly. No one did. Because invisible labor only becomes visible once it stops. By then, Daniel and I had settled into a new home near Charleston after my reassignment. Life there felt strangely peaceful. We cooked dinner together, argued over furniture colors, fell asleep without emotional warfare hanging over every conversation. For the first time in years, I stopped waking up waiting for a family crisis. Then one rainy Thursday evening, someone knocked at our front door. I already knew who it was before opening it. Dad stood on the porch wearing an old brown jacket that suddenly looked too large on him. He appeared smaller than I remembered. Older. The confidence he carried for most of my life seemed stripped away somehow. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked past me into the warm light of my home and quietly asked, "Can I come in?" We sat across from each other in the living room while rain tapped softly against the windows. Daniel respectfully disappeared into the kitchen, giving us privacy. Dad kept staring at his hands. "I didn't understand," he finally said. I waited. "You never acted like you needed anything." There it was. The core misunderstanding of my entire life. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. "So you assumed I didn't deserve anything either?" His eyes immediately filled. "Number." "But that's what happened." Dad swallowed hard. "I thought Claire was more fragile." I almost smiled. Fragile. Interesting word for someone who destroyed everyone around her whenever life became inconvenient. Meanwhile, I had survived deployments, emergency evacuations, sleepless operations, and years of emotional abandonment without collapsing once. Yet somehow I was the one expected to endure quietly forever. Dad's voice cracked suddenly. "Why didn't you tell us what you were doing?" That question finally broke something loose inside me. I looked directly at him. "Because I wanted a family who loved me before they knew what I could provide." He covered his face with one hand. "And for the first time in my entire life," my father cried. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the devastated, exhausted tears of a man finally forced to confront the daughter he failed to see. After several minutes, he whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. "Strong daughters still need fathers, don't they?" I felt my throat tighten instantly. "Yes," I said softly, "they do." When he left that night, neither of us pretended everything was fixed. Some damage survives apologies. Some grief arrives too late. But before walking out the door, Dad paused on the porch and looked back at me one last time. "I am proud of you, Evelyn." The words landed gently, tenderly. Years too late, but real. After he drove away, my phone buzzed once more. A text message from him. "I love you, I always did." I stared at the screen while rain fell quietly outside, and Daniel wrapped an arm around my shoulders from behind. Then I smiled softly, and finally let the past go. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever known what it feels like to be the strong one in the family, I hope you remember this: being dependable does not mean being disposable. We share new emotional stories like this every day, so subscribe and stay with us for the next journey.